Welcome to this explainer. Environments aren't just backdrops. Whether we're exploring ancient folklore, wandering through medieval fortresses, or jumping into modern video games, the spaces we inhabit are actually non-human characters. They quietly, but absolutely dictate the stories taking place within them. The architecture around us, whether it's forged in myth, carved out of stone, or written in computer code, is secretly controlling the narrative. So the core problem of world building is really this. How do we create an environment that immerses us entirely without breaking the illusion? Have you ever been totally lost in a fantasy novel, or maybe walking through a centuries-old historical site, or exploring a massive digital game, and then suddenly you just feel pulled completely out of the experience because something just didn't belong? Well, that jarring feeling is a failure of environmental immersion. Today, we're going to look closely at how creators across the centuries have solved this exact spatial problem using magic, stone, and algorithms. Let's dive right into part one, worlds that tell stories. Academics often study the effect of the non-human on the generation of a narrative. And I know, that sounds incredibly complex on the surface, but it's actually pretty intuitive once you think about it. Whether you're reading a 19th century German fairy tale, visiting a real Scottish castle, or playing a new video game, the physical space always sets the stage and drives the plot forward. The environment isn't just some passive, painted backdrop hanging behind the actors. It's an active, breathing participant. It forces characters to make difficult choices, it traps them in dangerous situations, it guides them down specific paths, and honestly, it tells a compelling story all on its own. Moving along to part two, forests of magic. Let's see how this builds in ancient folklore. Take Johann Musuis's fairy tale, The Chronicle of the Three Sisters. We follow an impoverished spendthrift count who honestly makes some terrible, terrible parenting decisions. Surviving on literally nothing but boiled potatoes, he wanders into this deeply haunted forest. There, he runs into three enchanted beasts. First, he meets a massive talking bear. In a sheer panic, he actually tries to feed the bear a potato to spare his own life. When that doesn't quite work, he trades his eldest daughter, Wolffield, for 100 pounds of gold. And somehow emboldened by these terrible choices, he later trades his other two daughters, Adelaide and Bertha, to a giant eagle for golden eggs, and then to a monstrous dolphin for pearls. The really fascinating thing is that the environment here is a weapon, driven entirely by narrative magic. For 6 days, the landscape is a dismal solitude. Castles turn into inaccessible rocks or damp caves. Beautiful lakes degrade into dim, muddy pools, and the princes are cursed to remain terrifying beasts. The physical architecture of the world is completely tethered to the magic of the spell, trapping everyone in this harsh cycle of shifting stone and mud. But every 7th day, right at sunrise, the spell resets. The caves transform back into splendid palaces glowing with velvet and crystal, and the beasts become handsome knights again. So the landscape is shifting rapidly, based solely on a sorceress spell, just to serve the emotional beats of the story. Fast forward a few decades, and the daughter's younger brother, Reginald the Child of Wonder, sets out to rescue them. To do this, he has to navigate this incredibly hostile architecture. We're talking about hiding under a bed in a bear's cave, waiting silently in a hollow tree high up in an eagle's domain, and sheltering in a submerged wood cellar beneath the Crystal Palace. It's intense, but the only way to truly free his family is to find the physical source of the magic. After defeating a magical bull, he shatters an alabaster tablet. That tablet is the literal architecture of the spell crafted by the sorcerer Zornabok. By destroying the code of the magic, he frees the physical world and absolutely everyone trapped inside it. Which brings us to part three. History carved in the stone. So what happens when the world building is physical and historical rather than magical? We've just seen how fairy tales use invisible spells to control a space. Let's transition over to Stirling Castle, a fortress that acts as a very real non-human character in the history of Scotland. Historians have noted that Stirling is one of Scotland's greatest stone castles, an icon integral to how we understand the nation's story. Just as that enchanted forest dictated the actions of the Count and his daughters, Stirling Castle literally dictated the actions of actual armies, monarchs, and entire nations. Generations of monarchs built a literal physical stage out of stone over a volcanic crag to project power and host real-life royal drama. And its position on that crag wasn't just some scenic choice. It made the castle highly defensible. The stone itself doesn't just host the story of Scottish royalty, its defensive positioning actively dictated what armies could and couldn't do. It served as the childhood home of Mary Queen of Scots. And later on, James V embellished the royal palace with these lavish European Renaissance fashions, basically to show off his immense power and cultivated taste to the rest of the world. And that leads us to part four, the digital terrain dilemma.
While fairy tales use magic and history uses stone, modern video games use code. And that brings us to a really unique spatial problem. How do you create an immersive world when that world is being built by a computer completely on the fly? Games like Skyrim or the Diablo series use procedural generation. Those are algorithms that build maps automatically to increase replayability. Because think about it, if a massive dungeon is different every single time you play, you're naturally going to want to keep playing. But this often fails at environmental storytelling. It can easily create totally incoherent spaces. For example, a computer algorithm might accidentally place the entrance to a dungeon right next to the exit staircase. That renders the entire grand adventure completely pointless and instantly breaks the illusion.
Or take a game like Minecraft. You might be exploring for hours and suddenly find a freezing, snowy biome directly adjacent to a sweltering jungle or a bone-dry desert. It's incredibly jarring. There's no gradual weather change, no natural transition at all. It makes absolutely zero logical sense for a patch of heavy snow to be touching a cactus. And the moment you see it, your immersion is instantly ruined. You are suddenly reminded that you're just looking at lines of code. Let's look at a fix for this in Part 5, Algorithmic Story-Driven Maps. To fix this exact immersion-breaking problem, academic researchers Elizabeth Matthews and Brian Malloy developed a brilliant algorithmic solution. They wanted the endless replayability of procedural generation, sure, but they needed the logical, storytelling coherence of a handcrafted world. So, they start what they call a location of interest, or an LOI. This is an anchor point that firmly ties the story to a specific physical spot on the procedural map. Think of it like Stirling Castle sitting on its volcanic crag, or the Eagle's Nest high up in that magical forest. The LOI strictly dictates what the environment must be around it. An ice cave absolutely requires a cold climate. A desert palace completely mandates a hot one. By following these exact algorithmic steps, game designers ensure that the transition between, say, a cold town and a hot desert progresses logically, preserving the story's precious illusion. First, they drop those vital story locations onto a blank grid. Then, and this is the truly genius part, they interpolate the climate between those points. They calculate a gradual blend exactly like Mother Nature does, so you won't suddenly get hotter walking toward a freezing ice cave. They use a boundary map to decide exactly where a temperate forest slowly turns into a humid jungle and combine it all to generate a map that actually feels real. To achieve this, the algorithm uses what's called a two-tuple. Now, that's really just a fancy way of saying it groups two critical pieces of data together, temperature and humidity. By calculating these across the map, it mathematically enforces a believable landscape. A high temperature combined with low humidity will always generate a desert. High temperature with high humidity generates a jungle. By tying these strict mathematical rules to the story's required locations, the algorithm acts exactly like the sorcerer's spell in our fairy tale. It firmly dictates the physical reality of the world to serve the narrative. So, whether a 19th century count is trapped by a sorcerer's spell in a shifting, unpredictable forest, or a modern gamer is exploring a procedurally generated digital map, both of these worlds completely rely on an underlying code. Whether it's magical or mathematical, that code is there to keep the story coherent. The ultimate goal across centuries of storytelling is exactly the same: to create an environment so believable and so structurally sound that you entirely forget you're experiencing a constructed fiction. I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you walk through a historic building, read a fantasy novel, or explore a video game world, ask yourself, what are the hidden rules, the spells, the stones, or the code that are secretly guiding your experience? Keep questioning the architecture of your immersion. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.